What if the biggest lie wasn't a scandal, wasn't a betrayal, but a timeline so carefully crafted that one wrong number could quietly collapse the entire story of Meghan Markle as the world thinks it knows it?
Things just got a whole load worse for Meghan Markle because her sister Samantha ain't going anywhere.
In my opinion, she would still be a waitress if it wasn't for Dad.
The buzz this morning centers around Meghan Markle's father.
See, it was because of Meghan that it was taken away. Meghan could have had her there if she wanted to have her there. Instead, she wanted to have a bunch of celebrities she barely knew, from the Clooneys to the Beckhams to Elton John to James Gordon to Timbuktu. I mean, it looked like anyone she'd met on the party circuit.
As our fathers, so we have to include the men when we are self-glorifying. You know, there's got to be some acknowledgement there.
Described as a devastating betrayal, this revelation could change everything we thought we knew about the Duchess of Sussex.
I'm going to quote Tom Bauer by saying, he said, look, we all laughed at Samantha and she was right. And everything she said has come true.
When she said, I lost my father, we knew that she didn't lose our dad. She iced our father.
Tragic news coming in. Meghan Markle's father, Thomas Markle, is undergoing leg amputation.
Something like that. So she wasn't even pregnant. It's very weird. And Harry, it was said to Harry, not to her. I mean, she just came in.
All right, I do blame Meghan Markle. Meghan Markle, stain of humanity. Yes, Meghan, and I hope you're watching right now. I hope you're watching, Meghan, because you are the stain of humanity.
Lady C, after Thomas Markle Jr. this week described Meghan Markle as previously having been a, quote, yacht girl, there have been more revelations going viral from the past.
Before the whispers about yachts, before the glossy interviews, before the fairy tale wedding that hypnotized millions, everything points back to one single dangerous detail: a number, a date. Something so small it should be unquestionable, and yet the moment you look closer, it starts to flicker. And once it flickers, it doesn't stop. Because if that one detail is off, even slightly, then every chapter that follows begins to feel staged, calculated, rewritten. And the most unsettling part, the people raising these questions didn't sit in a room together. They didn't coordinate. They didn't need to. Somehow, they're all circling the same crack in the story.
And I thought, what is she not contextually aware? She's trying to hide something. This is really sloppy pool.
Thomas Markle Jr., the sister of Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, has lashed out at his sister and her husband, Prince Harry, in the most brutal interview he has ever given.
Think about that. 3 different voices, different moments, different motivations, but all pointing in the same direction. And suddenly, it's not noise anymore. It's a pattern. And patterns don't lie easily, especially when one of those voices belongs to Samantha Markle, someone who claims she was there at the very beginning, the day everything started, the day that number became official. So what happens when the official version starts clashing with memory?
You know, it's just very bizarre how she just basically brushed the entire family under the carpet like we don't exist, and then lied about not having a family and lied about she doesn't have a family that she's always wanted. You know, we've always been.
The world has been told August 4th, 1981. Clean, simple, repeated everywhere. But then comes Thomas Markle Sr. speaking casually, almost carelessly, in an interview after the royal wedding. And he drops something that doesn't feel accidental. 40 years ago. Just words, just a phrase. But the timing? 2018 minus 40 doesn't land on 1981. It lands somewhere else entirely. And suddenly, that clean, simple timeline isn't so clean anymore.
I grew up as an only child, which everyone who grew up around me knows. I would have loved to have had siblings, so I'm so excited to be pregnant so that Archie has someone.
Now pause, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. This isn't a rumor blog. This isn't an outsider guessing. This is the man who was there, the man who watched her enter the world. So if his timeline shifts, even slightly, what else shifts with it? People noticed. Of course they did. The internet doesn't miss math. And once people start calculating, they don't stop at one number. They start digging, pulling threads. And that's when another voice enters, Thomas Markle Jr.
When you have been lied about for a series of years, how hurtful that is.
Now the focus moves, not just birth, but education. Claims that she didn't finish her final semester at Northwestern. Not delayed, not transferred, not compromised. complicated, just didn't finish. And if that's true, then suddenly the timeline between student and struggling actress becomes blurry. Not dramatic at first glance, but enough to disrupt the sequence. Because timelines rely on continuity, one event leading clearly into the next. But here, the transitions feel foggy. And then comes something even harder to pin down: a missing chapter. A period in her late teens, early adulthood that doesn't appear in polished interviews or high-profile documentaries. A chapter that exists only in fragments, hints, and uncomfortable suggestions from people who claim to have seen it. And this is where the story takes a sharper turn, because this isn't just about dates anymore. This is about entire years that feel selectively remembered, or maybe selectively erased. Mentions of a possible early life connection. Someone who, if the timeline holds, would now be around 30. A detail never addressed directly, not confirmed, not denied, just avoided. And silence in a story this public is never neutral. It's loud, suspiciously loud. Because while the public narrative paints a familiar picture, aspiring actress, small roles, humble beginnings, there's another layer unfolding quietly alongside it. Images, real ones, not rumors, showing her in places that don't quite match the struggling phase. Mediterranean yachts, Monaco parties, exclusive gatherings where access isn't earned through auditions, but through connections. And suddenly, the question shifts again. Not what happened, but how did it happen? Who opened those doors? Who made those introductions? Because the entertainment grind doesn't usually lead to private decks in Croatia. It doesn't casually drop someone into elite social circles where power moves quietly and deals are made without cameras. And yet, there she is. Present, smiling, integrated, and that's when the narrative begins to feel layered, carefully constructed, public on the surface, but something else underneath. Because at the same time these images exist, the official story stays consistent, controlled, repeated, almost too perfectly aligned. And when perfection shows up in human timelines, people start questioning whether it's real or rehearsed. Then comes another twist: relationships, connections that seem to accelerate everything. Trevor Engelson, Soho House circles, influential insiders, names that quietly unlock doors others spend years knocking on. And suddenly the climb doesn't look like a climb anymore. It looks like access. And the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to separate coincidence from design, because every piece on its own may be explainable, but together they start forming something else: a pattern, a rhythm, a story that feels less like a straight line and more like a carefully edited sequence. And here's the unsettling part: no one piece proves everything, but every piece raises something. And when enough somethings stack up, they stop being dismissible. They become impossible to ignore. And the question that starts forming isn't loud at first, but it grows. If the beginning doesn't align, if the middle feels incomplete, then what exactly are we looking at? A life story or a narrative still being rewritten? And just when it feels like the cracks couldn't get any deeper, the story doesn't slow down. It accelerates. Because timelines aren't just about the past, they bleed into everything that comes after. Every relationship, every decision, every moment that the world thought it understood. And suddenly, the focus shifts to something even more sensitive, more guarded, more fiercely protected: the royal chapter itself, where Prince Harry enters the picture. And everything changes overnight, because this is where the stakes explode. This isn't just a personal story anymore. This is global, institutional, historic. And yet, the same patterns people noticed before don't disappear. They intensify. The same questions about access, timing, and narrative control begin to echo louder, only now they're wrapped inside one of the most scrutinized families on the planet. And that's where the tension becomes almost unbearable, because the expectations of transparency are sky high, but what people actually see feels limited. The pregnancy announcement arrives October 2018, just 5 months after the wedding. Fast, very fast. Not impossible, but fast enough that people start watching closely, because royal timelines are usually documented with precision, almost like clockwork. Every step, every confirmation, every medical detail handled with a certain level of visible structure. But here, the structure feels different, tighter, more controlled, and that difference becomes impossible to ignore. No widely shared hospital arrival, no clear independent confirmations, no flood of traditional imagery that usually surrounds such monumental moments. Instead, everything feels distant, carefully framed, and that distance, it doesn't quiet curiosity, it fuels it, because when something that should be visible becomes restricted, people don't stop looking. talking, they look harder. And then comes the moment the world had been waiting for, the introduction of Archie Mountbatten Windsor. But even that moment, instead of settling questions, somehow multiplies them. The cameras are kept at a distance, the angles are controlled, the details minimal. And for many watching, it doesn't feel like clarity, it feels like limitation. And limitation in a story this public always triggers the same response. Why? Because when people expect openness and receive restriction instead, they start filling in the gaps themselves. And those gaps, they become breeding grounds for speculation. Theories begin forming, not because there's definitive proof, but because there's just enough missing to make the full picture feel incomplete. And once that process starts, it doesn't stop. It spreads, it evolves, it feeds on every small inconsistency, every delayed detail, every moment that doesn't align perfectly with what came before. Then the second announcement comes. Another child, another carefully managed rollout. And again, the same pattern repeats. Limited visibility, delayed documentation, a narrative that feels polished but distant. And by now, the conversation has shifted. It's no longer about one moment or one event, it's about consistency, or the lack of it. Because when the same questions appear again and again, they stop being isolated incidents. They start feeling like part of a larger design. And hovering over all of this are the voices that refuse to go away. Samantha Markle, Thomas Markle Jr., Thomas Markle Sr. people who were once dismissed, brushed aside as noise, as bitterness, as background drama. But time has a strange way of reshaping perception, because when certain details they mention start overlapping with public observations, even slightly, people begin to revisit what they said, not fully believing it, but no longer fully ignoring it either. And then there's Doria Ragland, a figure who on the surface appears calm, composed, almost untouched by the chaos surrounding everything else. But even here, questions creep in. Business records, timelines, connections that when examined closely seem to intersect with larger narratives in ways that raise eyebrows. Not definitive, not proven, but present. And presence alone is enough to keep the conversation alive. Because here's the truth no one can comfortably say out loud. This isn't about proving one shocking claim. It's about the accumulation of small, unresolved details that refuse to disappear. A birth date that doesn't sit perfectly. An education timeline that feels incomplete. Social circles that seem unusually elevated for the narrative presented. Royal milestones that feel more controlled than expected. Each piece on its own may be explainable, but together they create tension, and tension demands resolution. And yet, resolution never comes. Instead, the story keeps expanding. More interviews, more appearances, more carefully chosen words that seem to answer everything while somehow leaving the core questions untouched. It's like watching a puzzle where new pieces keep being added, but the center remains just slightly out of reach. Close enough to see, but never close enough to fully understand. And that's where the real unease settles in. Because people don't just question what they can see, they question what they feel is being withheld. And when a narrative feels managed rather than natural, when details appear curated instead of organic, when silence replaces clarity at critical moments, the mind doesn't relax. It leans in further. So now the question isn't simple anymore. It's layered, complicated, almost impossible to pin down in one sentence. Because what exactly are we dealing with here? A misunderstood public figure navigating impossible scrutiny? Or a story that has been carefully shaped, adjusted, and refined over time to present a version of reality that only partially aligns with what actually happened? And maybe the most unsettling part of all is that both possibilities can exist at the same time. Because in a world where image is everything, where narratives are currency, where perception can be more powerful than truth, the line between authenticity and construction becomes dangerously thin. And once that line blurs, it's almost impossible to redraw. So the voices keep talking, the clips keep resurfacing, the timelines keep being re-examined, and the audience, they keep watching. Not because they have all the answers, but because they can feel that something about the story doesn't quite settle, and maybe it never will. Because the deeper you go, the more it starts to feel like this isn't a story that ends with a clean conclusion. It's one that lingers, one that evolves, one that keeps revealing just enough to stay alive while holding back just enough to remain unresolved. And somewhere in all of that noise, all of those overlapping accounts, all of those unanswered questions, one quiet thought keeps echoing, growing louder each time it's revisited. What if the truth isn't hidden? What if it's been right there the entire time, just told in a way no one thought to question until now?